In the storm's fury, Luke Morgan, a former Marine, drove through the snow with Ranger. He wasn't seeking life, only silence. Then Ranger barked. 2 frozen puppies lay trembling beneath a pine. Luke lifted them close, their warmth fragile but alive. That single heartbeat in his arms became the miracle that changed everything. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel and let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support truly means the world to us. The wind screamed through the Montana mountains, carrying with it 1,000 shards of frozen air. Snow fell in thick, slanting sheets that blurred the pines into gray shadows. Luke Morgan trudged through it, his boots sinking deep into the powdery drift. He was a man of 46, broad-shouldered and weathered by years of cold and conflict. His face bore the faint scars of a life once lived in uniform, the quiet aftermath of a Marine who had seen too much. His eyes, a pale shade of gray, carried that hollow stillness that soldiers bring back from war. He no longer sought company, only quiet. But even quiet could ache sometimes. Beside him padded Ranger, his German shepherd, 7 years old and loyal beyond question. The dog's coat was a striking pattern of black and white, thick enough to defy the bitter wind. His movements were steady, deliberate, the gait of an animal trained to watch, wait, and protect. Ranger had been Luke's only companion since he left the service. They spoke the same language. Silence. Luke often thought of him not as a pet, but as a partner, the last soldier who hadn't walked away. The blizzard had grown meaner that evening. Luke adjusted the rifle slung over his shoulder and lowered his head against the stinging snow. The mountain trail wound like a ghostly ribbon between the trees, leading toward his small cabin near Lake Brindle. He wasn't far, maybe half an hour more, when Ranger stopped abruptly. The dog's ears pricked, his body tensed. Then came the sound, faint, almost lost beneath the wind, a high, trembling whine. Luke froze. For a heartbeat, the forest felt alive, holding its breath. "You hear that too, boy?" he murmured. Ranger answered with a sharp bark and dashed toward the noise. Luke followed, his boots crunching over crusted snow, heart quickening despite himself. He stumbled through a thicket, branches scratching at his coat, until Ranger stopped at the base of an old pine. There, half buried under a drift, lay 2 tiny shapes. Puppies, maybe 6 weeks old, huddled together, their fur stiff with frost. One whimpered weakly, the other barely moved. Their eyes were glazed, too young to understand what dying meant. Luke knelt, breath fogging in the cold, and for a moment something inside him cracked, a thin line in the ice that had sealed his heart for years. He removed his gloves, ignoring the bite of the wind, and gently lifted the pups. Their bodies were light, frighteningly so. He could feel the faint tremor of life still clinging inside. "Easy there, little ones," he whispered, his voice softer than he'd meant. Ranger sniffed them, tail low, whimpering as if urging Luke to hurry. The man hesitated only a second, torn between instinct and reason. But reason had lost too many times in war. He tucked the pups into his coat, close to the warmth of his chest, and stood. "Let's get them home," he said. The storm swallowed his words, but Ranger understood. The climb back was brutal. Snow lashed his face, visibility shrank to a few feet. Every step felt heavier, as if the mountain itself resisted him. The puppies stirred occasionally, faint movements reminding Luke that life still pulsed there. He thought of Afghanistan, of nights colder than this one, of carrying wounded men through blizzards that smelled of gunpowder and death. He had failed to save some. Maybe that was why he couldn't leave these 2 behind. He gritted his teeth and pressed on, Ranger leading through the storm like a ghostly guide. When the cabin finally came into view, a squat wooden shape half buried in white, Luke nearly collapsed with relief. He pushed the door open, heatless air greeting him from inside. The fireplace was dark, the logs piled neatly where he'd left them. Ranger shook off snow and circled near the hearth while Luke knelt, lighting the fire with trembling hands. The orange glow spread slowly, chasing the shadows away. He unwrapped the pups and placed them near the warmth. One of them let out a weak yawn. The other twitched as if startled by the light. Luke smiled for the first time in months, a small, tired smile, but real. He rubbed the smaller pup gently with an old wool towel, whispering encouragement like a man coaxing his own heart to keep beating. Ranger lay beside them, his large frame forming a living wall of heat. "You did good, boy," Luke murmured. The fire crackled louder, and outside, the wind began to soften. For the first time in a long while, the cabin felt less like a place of exile and more like shelter. He didn't know where the pups had come from or why fate had led him to them, but he felt it deep in his chest. This night had changed something. As the storm eased and the firelight flickered against the walls, Luke sat back in his chair, watching the two tiny lives breathing beside his dog. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching at a sound far off in the trees. A faint, distant bark, almost like a cry. Luke frowned, half rising, but then it faded into the storm. He told himself it was only the wind, yet some instinct whispered otherwise. Outside, in the wilderness beyond the cabin, something, or someone, was still waiting. The morning after the storm, the world outside Luke's cabin was a cathedral of silence. Snow blanketed everything in a perfect, deceptive peace. The air smelled of pine and cold iron. Luke stood on the porch, a cup of black coffee steaming in his gloved hand, watching Ranger trot across the yard. The big shepherd's paws sank deep into the snow, leaving crisp prints behind. Near the edge of the clearing, Luke noticed something that made him lower his cup, a set of tire tracks, broad and fresh, cutting through the untouched drifts. They weren't his. Nobody came up here. The last neighbor was 10 miles south. He crouched, brushing snow aside, to see the frozen mud underneath. The pattern wasn't from a hunting truck. It was heavier, industrial. The tracks circled the cabin and disappeared toward the tree line. Ranger sniffed the air and gave a low growl, his fur bristling along the spine. Luke's hand unconsciously went to his belt where his old service knife still hung. War had carved into him a habit: trust the silence, fear what breaks it. Inside, the two puppies were awake now, nibbling at a saucer of milk. Luke had spent the night warming them near the fire, wrapping them in a flannel shirt. They were small, maybe 6 weeks old, their fur still dull with dirt. One had a faint brown stripe down its back, the other pure white, with a single gray spot over its left eye. He hadn't named them yet. He didn't want to get attached, but he already had. By noon, Luke decided to drive down to the nearest supply store in town. The snow had thinned enough to make the road visible again. He needed dog food, antibiotics, and maybe answers. The store sat near a gas station at the edge of the small town of Pine Hollow, a collection of old wooden buildings where everyone knew everyone's mistakes. The bell above the door jingled as Luke entered. Warm air and the smell of sawdust greeted him. Behind the counter stood Sam Whitlock, a stocky man in his early 50s with a red beard and tired blue eyes. His plaid shirt strained against a frame built on years of lumber work. Sam used to be a hunter too, until an accident 3 winters ago left him with a limp and a permanent distrust of luck. "Morning, Luke," Sam said, his voice gravelly. "Heard you've been keeping to yourself up there." "Trying to," Luke replied. "You notice any trucks on the Ridge Road last night?" Sam frowned. "Not since before the storm." "Why?" Luke hesitated. "Found tracks, big ones. Didn't look like any I've seen." Sam scratched his beard. "Could be those ranchers from the valley, or them fellas again." "What fellas?" Sam's tone dropped. "The ones taking dogs. Folks have been missing pets for months now. Sheriff says coyotes. I don't buy it." Luke felt a chill crawl up his neck. He thanked Sam, bought what he needed, and headed back before the light fell. The sky was already dimming, clouds piling thick over the peaks. The drive up the mountain was slow, his old truck groaning against the incline. When he reached the cabin, dusk had turned the snow to silver. Ranger waited by the porch, ears pricked, tail rigid. The dogs inside barked nervously. Luke unloaded the supplies and stepped around the side of the cabin, lantern in hand. The tire marks were still there, but now another set joined them. Boot prints, large and deep, circling close to the window before fading into the woods. He followed a few steps, the lantern swaying in his grip, until Ranger growled sharply. Out beyond the tree line, a low, drawn-out howl drifted through the night. It wasn't the sound of a wolf. It was something else. Painful. Familiar. Luke froze, every instinct sharpened. It was the cry of a dog. A mother dog. And somewhere beyond the ridge, she was calling for something she had lost. The next morning, frost clung to Luke's truck like a second skin as he drove down the winding road toward Pine Hollow. The mountain air was brittle and clear, the sky washed pale blue after the night storm. The two puppies slept inside a worn wool blanket on the passenger seat, their breathing soft and rhythmic. Ranger sat behind them, watchful, his head resting against the window, every few seconds glancing toward the tree line as if guarding ghosts. Luke's mind replayed the howl from last night, long, hollow, and desperate. He told himself it was a coyote, but something deep inside refused to believe it. The town was just waking. Smoke curled from chimneys, and the smell of coffee and firewood mingled in the air. Luke parked in front of a small weathered building with a sign that read, Pine Hollow Animal Rescue. The wooden letters were chipped, but the place radiated quiet care. Inside, the scent of antiseptic and hay blended with the faint whimper of animals. Behind the counter stood Sarah Lindley, a woman in her late 40s with soft auburn hair tied in a low braid, strands of silver catching the morning light. Her face carried the gentle wear of years spent working outdoors, sun-marked, honest, and patient. She was tall and slender, dressed in a faded green flannel and jeans tucked into worn boots. Her eyes were a calm hazel, steady and searching, the kind that saw straight through excuses. Luke introduced himself briefly, explaining how he'd found the two puppies in the snow. Sarah listened without interrupting, her hands already busy preparing a small tray with tools. "You did right bringing them in," she said, her voice warm but laced with a quiet authority. "They're barely 6 weeks old. Whoever left them out there didn't mean for them to survive." She examined the pups with gentle precision, her fingers sure and practiced. One whimpered, and she smiled faintly, rubbing its belly. "Strong little fighters. You can tell when they've got heart." Luke nodded, arms crossed. "There's more. I heard something last night. Sounded like a dog. Hurt, maybe." Sarah's hands paused. "Where?" He gestured north. "Beyond the ridge. Same direction I found the tracks." Her expression changed, still calm, but her jaw tightened slightly. "You're not the first to hear it," she said after a pause. "A rancher down by the river lost his shepherd last month. Then a farmer in Elk Creek, same thing. Females, all of them. We think someone's taking them." Luke frowned. "For what?" Sarah sighed and leaned against the counter, folding her arms. "There's been talk of a dog trafficking ring, breeding for rare colors or fighting. Sheriff won't say it aloud, but he's been dodging reports. I've found broken chains in the forest. Cages even. North side of the woods. Nobody patrols there much." Her voice lowered, carrying the weight of frustration and exhaustion. "You spend enough years saving. What people throw away, you start to see how deep cruelty runs." For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the wind stirred the snow against the window, whispering like distant footsteps. Sarah finally looked at him again. You said you live near the ridge? That's close to where we found a metal crate last fall. Empty, but with claw marks all over it. Luke's eyes darkened. I'll take a look when I head back. Sarah hesitated, then reached into a drawer and handed him a small radio. Take this, Channel 6. If you find anything, or if you hear that sound again, call me, and keep those pups inside at night. As Luke gathered the puppies, Sarah's tone softened. You've got a good heart, Mr. Morgan. Most folks would have walked past them. He gave a brief smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. Maybe I'm just tired of leaving things behind. She nodded in understanding, that kind of silence only two lonely souls could share. When Luke stepped outside, the air bit colder. He placed the pups back into the truck and looked once toward the North Ridge. The forest loomed there, still and endless. Ranger barked once, low and uneasy. Luke turned the key, the old engine rumbling to life. Behind him, Sarah watched from the doorway, arms crossed, a shadow of worry etched in her gaze. Neither of them knew it yet, but the cry Luke had heard in the storm wasn't a coincidence. It was a call for help. By late afternoon, the clouds had lowered again, bruised and heavy, sealing the mountains beneath a gray dome. Luke tightened his coat and scanned the ridgeline above him. The snow from the last storm hadn't yet settled. His boots crunched over half-frozen slush as Ranger led the way, nose close to the ground. The dog's breath steamed in the cold, his body tense with focus. They had followed the tire marks Sarah mentioned, faint impressions cut deep into the frozen mud, leading higher into the forest. The air smelled of metal and pine sap, sharp and dry. The trail wound through narrow passes where the pines grew twisted and close together. Luke's breath came in steady clouds. He moved like a soldier again, quiet, precise, his eyes scanning every branch, every sound. Ranger stopped suddenly near a bend where the snow gave way to a gravel path. There, half buried in frost, stood an old flatbed truck, tilted slightly to one side. Its paint had once been green, but now was scabbed with rust. The windows were cracked and one of the doors hung open. Luke approached carefully, hand near his knife. The silence around him felt wrong, too deliberate. Inside the truck bed, streaks of dried blood stained the metal, frozen into a dark crust. Tufts of gray fur clung to the ridges along the rails. Ranger sniffed, growled low, then barked once, sharp and alarmed. Luke's stomach tightened. He crouched beside the vehicle and found a length of chain broken at one end. The padlock still attached to it bore a stamp, Evergreen Kennel Co. The name meant nothing to him, but the industrial design wasn't for pets. It was for captivity. Ranger's barking grew louder. The dog darted ahead toward a line of rocks that rose steeply into a cliff. Luke followed, slipping once on the icy slope. The wind howled through the trees, carrying a smell, something musky, organic, mixed with oil. Then he saw it, a steel door, half hidden behind snow-covered brush, built into the side of the mountain. A chain hung across it, the padlock gleaming faintly beneath the fading light. The sound that came from behind it was soft, almost human, a whimper, followed by a low, pained cry. Luke knelt and pressed his ear against the door. "Easy," he whispered. The sound came again, weak but desperate. Ranger pawed at the snow, whining. Luke pulled a small crowbar from his pack and wedged it into the lock, but the metal was fused shut, as if someone had welded it closed. He struck it again, the clang echoing through the trees. No use. He looked at Ranger. Someone wanted this to stay shut. The dog let out a low growl, eyes fixed on the woods behind them. For a moment, Luke thought he saw movement, a flicker of black between the trees. He turned, heart hammering, but there was only wind. Still, the feeling of being watched pressed on him like weight. He crouched beside the door again and spoke softly. "Hang on in there. We'll come back." From behind the steel, a faint scratching answered him. Then silence. By the time Luke made it back to the truck, the sun had vanished behind the ridge, turning the sky to dull pewter. The drive down was slow. The road had turned slick with ice. His mind replayed every sound, every mark on that truck. The padlock's emblem burned in his thoughts. Evergreen Kennel Co. An old name, maybe, but tied to something alive, something cruel. When he reached the cabin, the puppies were awake, tumbling clumsily over each other by the fire. For a moment, the warmth of home dulled the cold in his chest. He sat beside them, Ranger curling at his feet, and turned the small radio Sarah had given him. Static hissed, then her calm voice broke through. "Sarah Lindley here." Luke pressed the button. "I found something," he said quietly. "A truck, blood, chains, and a locked door in the mountain." There was a pause, then Sarah's voice came back, soft but firm. "Don't go back there alone, Luke. Promise me." He didn't answer immediately. Outside, the wind moaned against the cabin walls, and in the distance, far off across the snow, came one faint bark, hollow, haunting, and unmistakably a call for help. By dusk, the snow clouds had thickened again, turning the sky into a dull mass of steel. Luke's truck crept up the icy road with its headlights dimmed, Sarah seated beside him, wrapped in her wool coat and determination. Her expression was sharper tonight, the warmth from the clinic replaced by resolve. "Sheriff's men will meet us halfway," she said, her hazel eyes fixed on the winding path ahead. "If they don't back out again." Luke grunted. "They won't get the chance." Ranger sat in the back, restless, occasionally letting out a low growl, as if sensing what lay ahead. They arrived at the mountainside where the steel door once stood. It was gone. Only disturbed snow and the faint marks of heavy boots remained. Ranger sniffed frantically, leading them to a depression behind the rocks. There, half hidden beneath pine needles, yawned the mouth of a narrow tunnel. Cold air poured from it, carrying the unmistakable stench of oil, fear, and wet fur. Luke clicked on his flashlight. "This is where they moved them," he murmured. Sarah's breath misted beside him. "Or where they're keeping more." Sheriff's Deputy Tom Weller arrived minutes later. He was a tall, burly man in his early 40s, the kind whose presence filled a doorway. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, and a short beard framed a face weathered by years of small-town trouble. Tom's reputation was mixed, fair when sober, unpredictable when not. Tonight, though, his voice was steady. "You sure about this, Luke?" Luke nodded. "I heard them last night. Dogs. They're still down there." Tom glanced toward Sarah. "If we go in, we do it quiet. No heroics." Luke smiled faintly. "That's never worked for me." They descended into the tunnel single file, Luke in front, Ranger close, Sarah and Tom behind. The passage widened into a cavern lit by hanging lamps, revealing a makeshift holding area of rusted cages. Inside, the terrified eyes of several dogs reflected the light, their whimpers echoing off the stone walls. Luke's stomach turned at the sight, collars dug into raw necks, chains clinking softly with every movement. Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth. "My God," she whispered. Ranger growled low, his fur bristling. Movement flickered at the far end, a man stepping from behind a crate, flashlight beam slicing through the gloom. He was in his late 30s, lean and sharp-featured, with a cold, impatient stare. His name tag, half torn, read Dawson. His gloved hand rested on the butt of a pistol. "You folks lost?" he said smoothly, voice soaked in arrogance. "Private property." Luke's jaw tightened. "Evergreen Kennel Co.? That's you?" Dawson smirked. "Used to be, until people started asking too many questions." Behind him, another man appeared, shorter, bald, holding a crowbar. Before words could turn to reason, Dawson raised his pistol. Ranger lunged first, knocking the weapon aside as it fired. The shot ricocheted against stone, sparks flaring in the dark. Chaos erupted. Tom tackled the second man while Sarah rushed to the cages, fumbling with locks. Luke swung his flashlight, striking Dawson across the jaw. Blood splattered against the rocks. The sound of barking filled the tunnel, a chorus of panic and freedom. "Get them out!" Luke shouted. Sarah threw open cages one by one as frightened dogs bolted toward the tunnel mouth. Ranger herded them, limping slightly from a graze along his shoulder where the bullet had glanced. Dawson staggered back, clutching his jaw, and reached again for his gun. But Luke was faster. A single punch sent him sprawling. "That's for every one of them," Luke muttered. By the time reinforcements arrived, the smugglers were on the ground, hands zip-tied, and the cavern echoed with the sounds of barking and footsteps fading into the snowy night. Tom radioed for backup, breathing hard but grinning. "Remind me not to doubt you again." Luke wiped the blood from his knuckles, exhaustion catching up with him. Ranger stood beside him, chest heaving, but eyes bright with victory. Sarah knelt by the wounded dog, checking the shoulder wound gently. "You're a brave boy," she whispered, smiling through tears. Outside, the first flakes of new snow drifted down as Luke looked back toward the tunnel. The cages were empty now, every one of them. For the first time in years, he felt something inside thaw. "Let's go home," he said quietly, and Ranger wagged his tail in agreement. By dawn, the storm had thinned into a quiet snowfall, the kind that fell straight and slow, like dust from heaven. The ridge that only hours ago had echoed with gunfire now lay silent beneath a white blanket. Luke stood at the tunnel's mouth, breath-forming clouds in the freezing air, the adrenaline fading from his veins. His knuckles were bruised, his coat torn, and there was a smear of dried blood along his jaw he hadn't noticed. Beside him, Ranger limped, but held his head high, tail wagging faintly, as if to remind his master that they had both survived. Behind them, the soft hum of engines grew louder as police trucks arrived through the snow. Deputy Tom Weller led the team up the path, his coat dusted with frost, his expression serious but satisfied. "We've got them all," he called out. His voice carried through the cold. "Dawson and his men are in custody. The holding site's clear." He turned toward Luke, offering a short nod that said more than words. Sarah was beside him, her auburn hair damp from melting snow, her cheeks flushed from exhaustion. She had stayed through the night tending the freed dogs, bandaging their wounds, whispering soft comforts like a mother would to children long lost. Luke followed her down into the clearing where the cages had been moved into daylight. The dogs, dozens of them, stood or lay quietly, some still trembling, some already wagging their tails as if the morning sun itself had freed them. Sarah knelt beside one cage that had been left covered with a heavy tarp. She looked up when Luke approached. "There's one more," she said softly. "This one. She's different." Luke pulled the tarp aside and his breath caught. Inside lay a large German Shepherd female, her fur a silver-gray sheen, matted but still beautiful beneath the grime. Her eyes, pale amber and intelligent, met Luke's with something between fear and trust. The tag around her neck read only a number. But when Ranger stepped forward and sniffed, she let out a soft whine. The two dogs recognized each other instantly. Ranger barked once, sharp and joyful. The mother dog pushed her nose against his muzzle, then turned toward Luke. Slowly she crawled out, despite her weakness, and pressed her head against his hand. Sarah's voice trembled. "Luke, I think she's their mother. The two pups you saved." Luke stared down at the dog, his gloved hand stroking the ridge of her head. He remembered the two tiny bodies trembling under his coat in the snow. "She came looking for them," he murmured, "and we found her." The German shepherd let out a low, grateful sound, licking the back of his hand. For a moment, everything, the cages, the darkness, the cruelty, seemed to fade into that single, quiet act of recognition. Tom returned from the trucks, a clipboard in hand. "We're sending the dogs to the rescue center for now," he said. "You two did good work." He gave Sarah a weary smile. "Never thought I'd see the day this town cleaned up something this dirty." Sarah brushed her hair back and stood. "It's not over," she replied. "We still have to heal them." Her voice was soft, but it carried the same strength that had kept her up all night. The snow thickened as Luke and Sarah loaded the rescued dogs into the transport vans. The mother dog refused to leave Ranger's side, resting her head against his shoulder. Luke knelt, adjusting her collar gently. "You're safe now," he whispered. She blinked slowly, as if understanding. When the last van door closed, Luke looked up to see the first light of morning breaking over the mountains. The snow reflected it back in gold and white, and for the first time in years he felt warmth that wasn't from fire. Sarah stood beside him, arms folded, smiling faintly through the tears she refused to hide. He looked at her, then at Ranger and the mother dog, now leaning against each other in the snow. "Maybe," he said quietly, "the mountain's not such a lonely place after all." Sarah nodded. "Not anymore." And as the convoy rolled down the ridge, leaving fresh tire tracks in the untouched snow, Luke lingered for a moment longer, eyes on the horizon. The world seemed brighter, washed clean, and for once the silence felt like peace. Spring came quietly to the mountains, melting away the last remnants of winter's scars. The old site of the evergreen kennel was unrecognizable now. Where rusted cages and concrete walls once stood, rows of timber beams and warm cedar panels had risen. A new wooden sign swayed in the breeze, painted by hand. Ranger's Haven, Rescue and Sanctuary. The sound of barking no longer echoed in fear, but in joy. The air carried a new kind of music, life returning where cruelty once ruled. Luke Morgan stood by the gate, hammer still in hand, surveying the place with a faint, proud smile. His face had changed since that winter. The deep lines of solitude softened, his eyes clearer, steadier. His flannel sleeves were rolled up, revealing scarred forearms that told stories of both war and redemption. Ranger trotted beside him, fully healed, his coat glossy under the sun. Beside them bounded the two pups, now almost grown. One had kept the gray patch over its eye, the other had turned pure white with streaks of silver. They ran circles around their mother, who lay under the shade of a pine tree, calm and watchful, her amber eyes following their every move with quiet pride. Sarah Lindley arrived from the nearby cabin, her arms full of supplies. Her auburn hair caught in the light wind, glinting with faint silver threads. She wore jeans and a faded blue shirt smeared with dirt and paw prints, yet she carried herself with quiet grace. A woman who found peace through labor, who smiled even when tired. "Fence is almost done," she said, handing Luke a cup of coffee. "Tom's sending over more volunteers tomorrow. Apparently half the town wants to help rebuild what was lost." Luke chuckled softly. "Guess miracles do happen, huh?" She tilted her head. "Sometimes you just have to make them yourself." A pickup truck rumbled down the road and stopped by the gate. Out stepped Mr. Jenkins, the town's retired carpenter, a wiry man in his 60s with weather-beaten skin and hands calloused from decades of building barns. "Heard you needed more planks," he said gruffly, though his eyes twinkled kindly. "Can't have the dogs running loose now, can we?" Sarah thanked him warmly, and the old man gave Ranger a scratch behind the ear before heading off to unload the wood, muttering something about good souls fixing bad places. As afternoon waned, Luke and Sarah sat on the porch steps watching the dogs play in the open field that once held cages. Ranger stretched lazily on the wooden boards, one paw draped over the other. The mother dog lay nearby, her pups tumbling clumsily through the grass. Sarah leaned against the railing, voice soft. "It's strange," she said, "how something broken can turn into something beautiful." Luke nodded. "Guess that goes for people, too." For a long time, neither spoke. The mountain wind whispered through the trees, gentle and forgiving. When the first flakes of early winter snow began to fall that evening, Luke rose and looked out toward the ridge where it had all begun. The sky was pale gold fading into silver. He glanced down at Ranger and murmured, "This time, no one's left out in the snow." Ranger thumped his tail against the porch, and Sarah smiled, eyes glistening. The sanctuary lights flickered on behind them, casting a warm glow that spilled out into the night. A small promise kept at last. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or shining light. They arrive quietly, in the form of a loyal dog, a helping hand, or the courage to begin again. Luke's story reminds us that even in the coldest winters of life, God plants warmth where love chooses to act. Every rescue, every kindness, is proof that His grace still moves among us, turning pain into purpose, loss into light. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment with your prayer or blessing, and subscribe to join our growing family of faith, compassion, and second chances. May God bless you, guide your days, and keep your home warm, no matter how heavy the snow may fall.